I, 35M, need to share something that has completely shattered my world. The truth I discovered has made me question everything I thought I knew about my family, especially my father Robert, 65M. For context, I grew up in an affluent family in Boston. My father Robert built a successful chain of high-end Italian restaurants that became a local institution. My mother Sarah, 62F, managed our household and attended various social events to maintain our family status in the community. I also have a younger sister Emma, 30F, who was always our father's favorite. Growing up, my earliest memories are of spending time in my father's restaurant kitchens. I loved watching the chefs work, the energy of the kitchen, and the satisfaction on customers' faces when they enjoyed their meals. But my father never wanted me to be a chef. In his mind, I was born to be a businessman, to take over his empire and expand it further. My childhood was a series of business lessons and lectures about responsibility. While other kids went to summer camps, I spent my summers learning about profit margins and inventory management. My father controlled every aspect of my life, my education, my hobbies, even my friends. He only approved of children from other business families, saying I needed to build the right connections for my future. The tension between us started when I was in high school. I joined the culinary club instead of the business club he wanted me to join. He was furious, saying I was wasting my time learning to cook when I should be learning to manage people who cook. Our relationship became increasingly strained as I insisted on pursuing my own path. Against his wishes, I applied to culinary school after high school. When I got accepted, he refused to pay for it, thinking it would force me to attend business school instead. But I had been preparing for this. I had saved money from summer jobs and applied for scholarships and loans. His face when I told him I didn't need his money is something I'll never forget. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. The years in culinary school were tough but rewarding. I worked multiple jobs to support myself, often pulling 16-hour days between classes, work, and studying. My father used this as ammunition, constantly telling family members how I was struggling while Emma was thriving in business school, fully paid for by him, of course. After graduation, I started working my way up in various restaurants. I wanted to learn every aspect of running a restaurant, not just the cooking. I worked as a dishwasher, line cook, sous chef, and eventually head chef. Every position taught me something valuable. During this time, I met Lisa, 33F, who was working as a server while pursuing her MBA part-time. Lisa was everything my father would hate: independent, ambitious, and from a middle-class background. We connected instantly over our shared love of food and determination to succeed on our own terms. When I introduced her to my family, my father's disapproval was immediate. He took me aside and said I could do better than a server, that I needed someone from our social circle who would understand our family's position. Over the next few years, I noticed a strange pattern in my career. Every time I got close to advancing, something would go wrong. I would get passed over for promotions despite glowing reviews. Restaurants would suddenly decide not to expand when I was next in line for an executive chef position. At first, I thought it was just bad luck. I started trying to open my own restaurant 5 years ago. My business plan was solid. I had years of experience, innovative ideas, and Lisa's business expertise. But every attempt failed mysteriously. Investors would pull out at the last minute. Property deals would fall through. Health inspections would become unnecessarily complicated. Last year, everything finally seemed to be coming together. We found the perfect location, secured investors, and assembled an amazing team. We were weeks away from opening. The renovations were complete, staff was hired and trained, and our test dinners had received amazing feedback. Then suddenly, our main investor pulled out. The investor's reason made no sense. They cited concerns about my professional history and mentioned receiving anonymous tips about me being difficult to work with. This confused me because I had always maintained good relationships with my employers and colleagues. Something felt off, so I started investigating. I reached out to past employers, colleagues, and potential investors from failed ventures. Slowly, a pattern emerged. People had received letters, calls, and emails warning them about working with me. Health inspectors admitted to being pressured to be extra harsh on my projects. Former employers revealed they had been threatened with legal action if they promoted me. All the threads led back to one person, my father. He had been systematically destroying every opportunity I had to succeed independently. He used his connections, his money, and his influence to make sure I would never establish myself outside of his control. When I confronted him in his office, showing him all the evidence I had gathered, he didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he acted like he had done me a favor. He said he was protecting me from wasting my life in the kitchen when I was meant for greater things. In his mind, by crushing my dreams, he was forcing me to accept my real destiny, taking over his business. I was furious. 15 years of my life had been manipulated by my own father. Countless opportunities destroyed, relationships damaged, all because he couldn't accept that I wanted a different life than the one he planned for me. I told him I never wanted to see him again and walked out. My mother has been calling constantly, saying he did it out of love and that I'm being too harsh. Emma sided with our father, saying I should be grateful that he cared enough to try to protect me from making mistakes. I've blocked both my father and Emma. My mother keeps trying to arrange a family meeting to sort things out, but I've refused. Lisa supports my decision but suggests I should at least hear them out for closure. But how can I forgive someone who systematically destroyed my dreams for 15 years? Ida for cutting them off completely? Update 1. The past 2 weeks have been absolute chaos. After my last post, things spiraled in ways I never expected. I thought cutting contact with my father and Emma would give me some peace, but instead, it sparked a family war that exposed even darker secrets. Initially, my father tried to downplay everything. He started calling family members, telling them I was having some sort of breakdown due to business stress. He painted himself as a concerned father who only tried to guide his confused son. Emma joined in, telling everyone how I was being dramatic and ungrateful. They crafted this narrative that I was just bitter about my failed restaurant ventures and was blaming my father for my own failures. Most of our extended family believed them at first. I started getting calls and messages from relatives telling me to apologize to my father and stop embarrassing the family. Some even suggested I needed professional help. My cousins stopped talking to me, and I was uninvited for my niece's baptism. It felt like my entire family was turning against me. But then something unexpected happened. My mother's sister, Aunt Janet, 58F, called me late one night. She was crying and asked if we could meet in person. I was hesitant at first, thinking she was just another relative trying to convince me to reconcile with my father. But something in her voice made me agree. When we met at a small cafe far from our usual family spots, Janet told me about my cousin Mark, 40M. Mark had been the golden child of our extended family, smart, hardworking, and successful. He had worked in my father's restaurants during college and learned the business from the ground up. Everyone expected him to open his own restaurant someday. But 10 years ago, Mark suddenly moved to Australia. The family story was that he had a mental breakdown from work stress and needed a fresh start. Janet revealed the truth. Mark had tried to open his own restaurant in a neighboring city. He had everything planned perfectly and had even secured funding from investors outside our father's circle of influence. 3 months before the opening, everything fell apart. Health inspections failed mysteriously, permits were denied, and investors pulled out. Mark lost everything, including his life savings. He became depressed and distant. It was only years later that he told Janet the truth. He had discovered that my father was behind everything. Janet helped me get in touch with Mark. When we video called, it was like looking into a mirror of my own experience. Mark had kept everything, emails from scared-off investors, letters from lawyers, and even recordings of conversations with people my father had paid off. He had been gathering evidence for years, hoping to expose my father someday but afraid of the consequences. The most devastating revelation came when I confronted my mother with this information. I expected her to be shocked, but instead, she broke down and admitted she had known about everything, not just what happened to me, but to Mark as well. She showed me a hidden diary where she had documented my father's schemes over the years. My mother revealed that my father's controlling behavior wasn't limited to business. He had threatened to leave her penniless if she ever went against his wishes. She had spent years watching him destroy people's lives while feeling powerless to stop him. Her compliance was bought with luxury and security, but it had eaten away at her conscience. Emma's reaction to all this was the most surprising. When I tried to show her the evidence, she became defensive and angry. She accused me of trying to ruin our family and threatened to sue me if I didn't drop everything. Her reaction seemed extreme until my mother revealed another secret. Emma's supposedly successful interior design business was a sham. My father had been secretly funding Emma's entire life. Her design business was just a front to launder money from his restaurants. The high-end clients she claimed to have were all connected to my father. Her apartment, car, vacations, everything was paid for by him. She wasn't defending him out of loyalty, she was protecting her lifestyle. I shared Mark's evidence with some family members who had been criticizing me. The response was immediate. Many apologized and shared their own stories of how my father had manipulated or threatened them over the years. Uncles who had mysteriously sold their businesses, cousins who had suddenly changed careers, all of them had stories about my father's interference. Lisa suggested we use all this evidence to finally expose my father publicly or take legal action. We started consulting with lawyers about our options. But before we could decide on a course of action, my father showed up at our house unannounced. He was furious. He had somehow found out about my conversations with Mark and my mother's confession. He threatened to destroy not just my career but Lisa's as well. He said he would make sure we never worked in the restaurant industry again. He would call every contact he had, use every resource at his disposal to ruin us completely. What my father didn't know was that I was recording the entire conversation on my phone. For the first time, I had direct evidence of his threats and manipulation. Now I'm considering going public with everything, Mark's evidence, my mother's diary, the recording of my father's threats, all of it. My mother is begging me not to expose everything, saying it would destroy our family's reputation and affect innocent people who work for my father. Emma called me selfish and threatened to never speak to me again if I went through with it. Even some relatives who initially supported me are now asking me to handle this privately. Lisa supports whatever decision I make, but she's worried about the potential backlash. Ida, if I expose everything and potentially destroy my entire family's reputation and livelihood? Update 2. After much consideration, I decided to expose everything, but in a strategic way that I never expected would uncover even darker secrets about my father's past. First, I worked with Lisa to create a detailed timeline of my father's manipulations. We reached out to everyone we could find who had been affected by his actions. The response was overwhelming. Former employees came forward with stories of blackmail and threats. Small business owners shared how my father had forced them to sell their restaurants through various pressure tactics. Even suppliers had stories about being coerced into exclusive contracts. We created a private website documenting everything: emails, recordings, testimonies, financial records, my mother's diary entries, everything. We didn't make it public but shared it selectively with key people in the restaurant industry, restaurant association board members, major investors, food critics, and other influential figures. The impact was immediate and devastating. My father's business partners started distancing themselves one by one. Many of them had suspected something was wrong but never had proof until now. His restaurants began losing customers as word spread through industry circles. The local restaurant association launched an internal investigation into his business practices. Then something unexpected happened. Marcus, 55M, who had been the head chef at my father's flagship restaurant for over 20 years, contacted me privately. He said he had something important to tell me, but he would only do it in person. When we met, Marcus was nervous and kept looking over his shoulder. He revealed something that changed everything I thought I knew about my father's success. The restaurant chain wasn't actually my father's creation at all. The concept, the recipes, even the original business plan, everything had been stolen from his former business partner, my godfather David, 70M. I barely remember David from my childhood. I was told he had abandoned the business and moved away when I was young. According to Marcus, the truth was far more sinister. David had been the real culinary genius behind the restaurants. He and my father had started with one small restaurant, but it was David's recipes and creativity that made it successful. As they planned to expand, my father wanted to focus on profits while David wanted to maintain quality and tradition. They fought constantly about the direction of the business. Then one day, David suddenly signed over his share of the business to my father and disappeared. Marcus helped me track down David, who was living in a small town in Maine. When I visited him, he was shocked to see me. He hadn't even known I had become a chef. Over several hours, he told me the real story. My father had discovered that David had a gambling problem and had borrowed money from some dangerous people. Instead of helping his friend and business partner, my father saw an opportunity. He bought David's debt and used it to blackmail him. Either David would sign over the business and leave town, or my father would make sure everyone knew about his debts, destroying his reputation and possibly putting his family in danger. David had proof of everything: old contracts, letters, recorded phone conversations he had kept as insurance. He had stayed quiet all these years to protect his family, but now he was ready to tell the truth. He was tired of seeing my father hurt more people. With David's evidence added to everything else, my father's empire began crumbling faster than anyone expected. Major restaurant critics revised their reviews, mentioning the true origins of the recipes. Investors started demanding audits. Several former employees filed lawsuits for wrongful termination. Emma finally saw the truth when her monthly allowance stopped coming in. She called me crying, saying she never knew the full extent of our father's actions. Her design business clients disappeared overnight when they realized she had no actual experience or portfolio. She admitted that our father had been paying people to hire her and praise her work. My father tried to do damage control. He held a press conference claiming all the allegations were false, that he was the victim of a conspiracy by jealous competitors. But halfway through, David walked in with Marcus and several other longtime employees. They were all ready to testify about what they had witnessed over the years. The local papers started investigating my father's business practices. They uncovered even more scandals: health code violations that had been covered up, taxes that had been evaded, employees who had been paid under the table. Everything he had built was based on lies and manipulation. Now my father's lawyers are working overtime trying to save what they can, but his reputation is destroyed. Most of his restaurants have already been sold or closed. The restaurant association revoked his membership. Even his social circle has abandoned him. I feel vindicated but also sad. Not for my father, but for all the people he hurt over the years. David has offered to help me open my own restaurant, saying it's time for the real family recipes to be used properly again. Ida, for exposing everything and causing my father's empire to crumble. Update 3. It's been half a year since my last update, and the aftermath of exposing my father's actions has led to permanent changes in our family dynamics and my professional life. My father's restaurant empire has been completely dismantled. The restaurants were sold off one by one to pay for legal settlements and mounting debts. Most were bought by local restaurant owners who had previously been driven out of business by my father. Some of them reached out to me, sharing stories about how my father had systematically forced them to sell their family businesses to him over the years. The divorce between my parents has been messy. After everything came to light, my mother finally found the courage to leave him. She had hidden away evidence of his schemes for years, and now she's using it to ensure he can't hide any assets during the divorce. She moved in with Aunt Janet and is slowly learning to live independently. She's been seeing a counselor and is starting to understand how toxic her marriage was. Emma's situation has been particularly difficult. Without our father's financial support, she lost everything: her fake business, her luxury apartment, her car, even her social circle. She had to move to a small studio apartment and take an entry-level job at a real interior design firm. The transition from her fabricated success to actual work has been harsh. She reached out to me recently, crying about how she never knew the full extent of our father's manipulation. She apologized for not believing me and admitted that she had been willfully blind because she didn't want to lose her comfortable lifestyle. While I accepted her apology, our relationship remained strained. Years of her acting superior and dismissing my struggles can't be erased with one apology. The most significant change has been in my professional life. David, my godfather, has become a mentor and father figure to me. He's been teaching me the original family recipes that my father stole, sharing stories about how each dish was developed. Working with him has helped me understand where my passion for cooking really came from. It wasn't rebellion against my father, but rather an unconscious connection to David's influence in my early years. With David's guidance and support from others in the industry who want to make amends, we're opening a new restaurant next month. We've named it Verità, Italian for truth. The menu will feature David's original recipes, properly credited this time. The response from the local restaurant community has been overwhelming, with many offering help and resources. My father made one last attempt to insert himself back into my life. He showed up at the construction site of Verità, looking nothing like the powerful man I remembered. He was crying, saying he had lost everything and finally understood his mistakes. He begged for another chance, promising to make things right. But some things can't be fixed. I told him that he hadn't lost everything. He had thrown it all away, piece by piece, every time he chose manipulation and control over love and support. I asked him to leave and never come back. The security team we hired, knowing he might try something like this, escorted him out. The biggest news is that Lisa and I are expecting our first child, a boy. Some family members have suggested that I should let my father meet his grandson, saying he deserves a chance to be a grandfather even if he failed as a father. But I've made my decision. My father will never meet my child. I won't risk him poisoning another generation with his manipulation and lies. David will be my son's grandfather figure. He's already talking about teaching him how to make pasta from scratch when he's older. Lisa's parents, who have been incredibly supportive through everything, will be the loving grandparents my child deserves. Some people say I'm being too harsh, that family is family. But I've learned that real family isn't about blood, it's about trust, respect, and genuine love. I've found my real family in Lisa, David, and the people who stood by me through everything. Sometimes cutting ties isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about protecting yourself and your loved ones from toxic influences. My father once told me that legacy was everything. He was right, but not in the way he meant. I'm building my own legacy now, one based on truth and integrity rather than lies and manipulation. That's the inheritance I want to pass on to my child.